An orphan inherits an old house in a small town, but what starts as a simple renovation becomes a journey of love, mystery, and unexpected family. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe for more stories. The rumble of the old pickup truck echoed down the winding road leading into Willowbrook. Emily sat in the passenger seat, gripping the strap of her backpack as she gazed out the window. Her eyes followed the stretch of endless pine trees, each one standing like a silent witness to the passage of time. The air smelled of fresh rain and earth, a sharp contrast to the city streets she'd left behind. "Almost there," said the driver, an elderly man with a thick New England accent. His name was Henry, a local cab driver who also ran the town's general store. He glanced at Emily with a kind smile. "You sure you're ready for this, kid? House like that's got a lot of ghosts in it." "I'm not afraid of ghosts," Emily replied, forcing a small smile. "I'm more afraid of leaky roofs." Henry let out a hearty laugh, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, you'll have both, I reckon. But you're a brave one, huh?" He nodded in approval. "Margaret would have liked that." Emily didn't reply. The mention of her Aunt Margaret brought a flicker of unease. She barely knew the woman, only recalling a handful of letters and a single visit when she was 12. But now, after Margaret's sudden passing, the old woman had left her this house. No explanations. No instructions. Just a deed with her name on it. As the truck turned a sharp bend, the house came into view. Emily's breath caught in her chest. It stood at the end of a gravel path, perched on a small hill like a forgotten relic of the past. The faded white paint peeled like dead skin, and the sagging roof slumped as if carrying the weight of a century's worth of storms. Tall weeds choked the garden, ivy crawling up the porch columns as if trying to reclaim the house for the forest. One of the upstairs windows was cracked, a jagged fissure running down its center like a scar. "Charming," she muttered under her breath. Henry pulled up beside the porch and killed the engine. "Looks worse than it is," he offered with forced optimism. "But I'd get that roof checked sooner rather than later. We get heavy rains this time of year." "Noted," Emily said as she climbed out, her boots crunching against the gravel. She slung her backpack over one shoulder, her eyes never leaving the house. It looked larger than she'd imagined. Larger, lonelier, and far more haunted by time than by ghosts. Henry helped her pull 2 suitcases from the truck bed, setting them on the porch with a grunt. He dusted off his hands and adjusted his cap. "Well, I reckon you'll be all right. If you need anything, swing by the general store. I'm always there." "Thanks, Henry," she said, offering him a grateful smile. With a final wave, Henry drove off, leaving Emily standing at the base of the steps. Alone. She sucked in a deep breath and let it out slowly. "All right, Emily," she muttered to herself, gripping the rusted banister. "It's just a house. Walls and a roof. You can do this." The first step groaned under her weight, and the second step felt like it might give out entirely. Her heart pounded in her chest as she hurried to the porch. She fumbled with the set of keys, finally unlocking the front door. The heavy wooden door swung open with a drawn-out creak, revealing the dim interior of the house. The air was thick with the stale scent of wood rot, dust, and something faintly metallic. Light seeped through lace curtains stained yellow with age. Emily stepped inside, her boots tapping against the scuffed hardwood floor. "Home sweet home," she said, her voice hollow in the stillness. The house groaned in reply. Her eyes swept the room. The furniture was still there, an old plaid sofa, a scratched coffee table, and a tall grandfather clock frozen at 2:47. Cobwebs hung like lace draped over the doorways. An old radio sat on the mantel, its dial cracked but frozen on station 107.9. The kitchen was visible down the hall, its linoleum floor curling up at the edges. The fridge hummed faintly, a small sign that at least something still worked. Her gaze lingered on a photo frame sitting on the fireplace mantel. She approached slowly, brushing off the dust to reveal a black and white photo of her Aunt Margaret, standing on this very porch, smiling with her arms crossed. The resemblance was uncanny. They had the same sharp cheekbones, the same defiant tilt of the chin. "You could have warned me, Aunt Margaret," Emily muttered, shaking her head. Suddenly, a loud knock at the door startled her. Her heart leapt into her throat. She spun around, eyes wide. The door was still ajar, and through the crack, she saw a woman in her mid-40s standing on the porch with her hands on her hips. She had short, wavy auburn hair and wore a denim jacket with sleeves rolled up to her elbows. "Hello?" Emily called out cautiously, stepping forward. "You Emily?" the woman asked, peering inside like she was inspecting the place. "Heard you were moving in." "Yeah," Emily replied. "Who's asking?" The woman smiled, walking right in like she owned the place. Sarah Collins. I live next door. She held out a hand. Emily shook it, her guard still up. This place needs some love, huh? You gonna be alright? Yeah, I think so, Emily replied, her eyes narrowing as Sarah's gaze swept over the room like she was taking inventory. Good, Sarah said, nodding with approval. Well, if you need anything, sugar, tools, or someone to yell at the squirrels, I'm right next door. Don't be a stranger. Thanks, Sarah, Emily said, offering a small smile. Don't mention it, Sarah replied, turning toward the door. Oh, and one more thing, she said, pausing in the doorway. Watch out for Evelyn. She's got eyes like a hawk and a tongue like a knife. Lives across the street. You'll know her when you see her. Noted, Emily said, raising an eyebrow. Sarah gave a quick wave and disappeared down the steps. Emily turned back to face the house, rolling up her sleeves. All right, time to get to work. Her first step was interrupted by a voice from behind. Well, look who thinks she's moving in, the voice drawled. Emily spun around and saw an older woman leaning against the mailbox at the end of the driveway. She had silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun so tight it might as well have been made of steel. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, watched Emily like a hawk zeroing in on prey. Can I help you? Emily asked, folding her arms. Name's Evelyn, the woman said, her eyes never leaving Emily. Been living here for 35 years. Seen people come and go. Mostly go. She sneered. You look like you'll be next. Emily's blood simmered, but she held her ground. Well, I plan to stay, she shot back. So I guess we'll be seeing a lot of each other. Evelyn's smile was razor sharp. We'll see. With that, Evelyn turned on her heel and walked back to her house, her posture stiff with silent disapproval. Charming neighbors, Emily muttered, shaking her head. She turned back to the house, her fingers curling into fists of determination. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a challenge. And Emily had never been one to walk away from a challenge. The sun dipped behind the trees as she picked up a broom from the hallway closet. Dust swirled in the air like tiny ghosts as she swept the floor clean for the first time in years. Her muscles ached, her breath was short, but she kept going. She had too much to prove, to herself, to Evelyn, and maybe even to the shadow of Margaret still lingering in the corners. When night fell, she lay on a thin mattress in the corner of the living room, Buddy curled up by her feet. The house creaked and groaned like it was speaking in its sleep, but Emily didn't mind. She'd spent her whole life being the one who didn't belong. Not anymore. This time she would stay. This time she would win. The sun broke through the foggy dawn, streaking the sky with pale pinks and soft oranges. Emily stood on the front porch, her hands on her hips, her gaze fixed on the towering house in front of her. She had spent her first night inside, listening to the constant creaks, groans, and distant pops of old wood contracting in the night. It had been unsettling, but she figured that if the house hadn't crumbled on top of her yet, it wasn't about to start now. Armed with a notepad and pen, she began her inspection. She scribbled furiously. Broken window in the upstairs bedroom. Leaking faucet in the kitchen. Rotten porch step, third from the bottom. Paint chipping everywhere. Possible squirrel in the attic? Emily sighed and sat on the front step, brushing away a fallen leaf. This is going to take more than elbow grease, she muttered to herself. The sharp thud of footsteps on gravel made her glance up. Sarah was walking over, carrying a basket of muffins in one hand and a bright red thermos in the other. Morning, rookie, Sarah called, her grin wide and mischievous. Looks like you survived your first night. Barely, Emily replied, rubbing her neck. I'm pretty sure I'm sharing the house with a squirrel. Then you're already ahead of the game, Sarah quipped, plopping down beside her on the step. She handed Emily the thermos. Coffee. Strong enough to make you see the future. Emily accepted it gratefully, sipping the hot brew. It tasted rich and bold, exactly what she needed. Her eyes wandered over her long list of repairs. You plan on doing all that yourself? Sarah asked, eyeing the notebook with a raised brow. Yeah, Emily said a little too firmly. I'm not afraid of a little hard work. Sarah nodded, her lips curling in a knowing smile. Hard work's fine, but stupidity's a whole other thing. Excuse me? Emily turned to her, eyes narrowing. Don't get me wrong, Sarah said, raising her hands in mock surrender. I admire the grit, but you're one person with two hands. That porch alone will take you weeks if you don't have the right tools. Trust me, I've seen it before. Folks think they can do it all themselves and next thing you know the roof's caving in. Emily hated to admit it, but Sarah had a point. She glanced down at her list again and for the first time, doubt crept in. Look, how about this? Sarah offered, tilting her head toward the road. I know people in town who'd be happy to pitch in. Some for free, some for a plate of cookies. We could make it a weekend project. Folks around here love an excuse to gossip and swing a hammer. Emily hesitated. Accepting help wasn't something she was used to. But as she glanced up at the chipped window, the rotting porch, and the house that towered over her like an unsolvable puzzle, she let out a breath. "All right," she said, leaning forward and rubbing her temples. "But no gossip." "Gossip's free," Sarah replied with a grin. "You can't stop it, but you can make sure they're talking about how awesome you are." By Saturday morning, Emily woke up to the hum of trucks pulling up outside. She peered through the lace curtains and was stunned by what she saw. 3 pickup trucks lined the street. Jack Henderson, the handyman she'd met briefly at the general store, stepped out of the first truck, carrying a heavy-duty toolbox over his shoulder. Behind him, 2 younger guys with paint-stained shirts hopped out of a white van. They were laughing, shoving each other like brothers do. Sarah was already outside, pointing and giving instructions like a drill sergeant. "Paint goes on the porch, Jack's on window duty, and those boards for the deck are going in the back. Move it, move it." Emily hurried to the door, yanking it open as Jack reached the bottom step. "Hope you don't mind the cavalry," Jack said with a lopsided grin. His beard was trimmed close and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms lined with faded scars. I didn't expect this many people," Emily said, glancing at the crew unloading supplies. "Word spreads fast in Willowbrook," Jack replied, climbing the steps. His boots thudded hard against the old wood, and when he reached the 3rd step, it let out a crack so loud it sounded like a gunshot. He froze, his eyes meeting Emily's. "Yeah, we'll fix that first," he said. "Noted," Emily replied, grinning despite herself. By mid-morning, the front lawn had turned into a construction zone. Jack was up on a ladder, replacing the broken window with careful precision. Sarah supervised the painting crew as they sanded down the porch railings. The hum of power drills and the thwack of hammers filled the air. It was chaos, but it was productive chaos. Emily found herself cleaning and scrubbing the kitchen, tossing out rusted pans and sweeping up years of dust and cobwebs. Every time she walked past a window, she saw people working together. Jack's stern instructions echoed through the air: "Don't strip it too much. You'll tear the wood." From the back of the house, Sarah's voice called, "Paint strokes with the grain, not against it, Timmy. If I see one more of you going cross-grain, I'm throwing you in the lake." Emily smiled to herself. It felt good to hear life around her. It felt like something was finally waking up in this house. Not just the floors and windows, but something inside her too. Later that evening, with the house finally quiet, Emily sat on the newly painted porch steps, her muscles aching in the best way. She'd spent the day working harder than she had in years, and it felt good. Her eyes traced the freshly sanded porch rails, the new panes of glass in the windows, and the paint cans stacked neatly in the corner. It wasn't finished, but it was a start. Buddy lay beside her, his chin resting on his paws. Emily scratched behind his ears, staring at the glow of fireflies flickering across the lawn. The world was still and peaceful, and for the first time since she arrived, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could make this house a home. Her moment of calm was broken when she noticed something unusual on the porch. A small white envelope, perfectly clean, was sitting on the step beside her. It hadn't been there earlier. Frowning, Emily picked it up. No address. No stamp. Just her name written in block letters. She flipped it over and pulled out a single piece of paper. Her eyes scanned the words, her heart beginning to race. "You don't belong here. Leave while you can." Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted toward the street, scanning the tree line, the road, and the shadows creeping along the edge of the woods. The only light came from the flickering porch bulb above her. With shaky fingers, she looked at the back of the paper. Just one more letter was scribbled at the bottom. E. Emily's heart thudded hard in her chest. Evelyn. It had to be her. Buddy sat up, his ears twitching, his eyes tracking something in the distance. Emily followed his gaze but saw nothing but trees swaying in the night breeze. Her jaw tightened as she crumpled the note in her hand. "You want me gone?" she muttered, her eyes narrowing. "You'll have to do better than that." She stood and turned toward the house, her fists clenched at her sides. The flickering porch light buzzed once, then twice before going out, leaving only darkness. But Emily didn't run. She stepped inside, locked the door and bolted it shut. The sun hung low in the sky, its golden light flickering through the treetops as Emily walked along the narrow trail at the edge of Willowbrook's forest. The scent of pine needles and damp earth filled the air, and the crunch of leaves underfoot was the only sound she heard. The woods were quiet this time of day, the kind of quiet that wasn't eerie but peaceful, like the world itself was holding its breath. Emily had started taking these walks each morning, partly to clear her head and partly to explore the surroundings of her new home. Her house was still a construction site, filled with the steady hammering of nails and the whir of power tools. Jack and his crew had been working overtime, and though she appreciated the help, she craved moments of stillness like this. As she reached a bend in the trail, something caught her attention. It wasn't a sound at first, more like a sensation that prickled the back of her neck. Then it came again. A soft whimper. Emily stopped in her tracks, her ears straining. It was faint but unmistakable. She turned slowly, scanning the thicket of bushes off to her right. Her eyes narrowed. "Hello," she called, her voice cautious. "Anyone there?" The whimper came again, followed by the rustle of leaves. It was closer this time. Her heart thumped against her ribs. She took a step forward, carefully parting the branches with her hands. And there he was. A small dog, barely more than a tangle of dirty fur, crouched in the hollow of a bush. His brown eyes, wide with fear, stared up at her. His ears were pinned back, and his tiny body trembled with every shallow breath. Twigs and burrs were tangled in his matted coat, and a faint scar ran across his muzzle. "Oh, you poor thing," Emily whispered, lowering herself to a crouch. She reached out slowly, her fingers open and gentle. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog flinched, his muscles tense and ready to bolt, but he didn't run. Emily stayed perfectly still, her hand just a few inches away from him. Her heart ached at the sight of him. Alone. Filthy. Terrified. She knew what that kind of fear felt like, the feeling of being unwanted, unseen, unimportant. "It's okay," she said again, her voice softer this time. "Come on, buddy. I've got you." Her patience paid off. The dog sniffed her hand cautiously, his little black nose twitching. Slowly, he stepped forward and nudged her fingers with his head. Emily let out a soft breath of relief, and before she could think twice, she scooped him up, cradling him against her chest. He stiffened at first but didn't struggle. "There we go," she murmured, stroking his back. "You're safe now." His tiny body melted against her, his head resting under her chin. For the first time his trembling stopped. Back at the house, Emily carried the little dog into her kitchen, setting him down on a folded towel on the floor. He sniffed around cautiously, his ears perked up, eyes darting at every sound. "All right, buddy," Emily said, opening a cabinet to grab a bowl. "I don't have dog food, but I've got leftover chicken. Will that do?" The dog's ears twitched at the word chicken. Emily pulled out a small container from the fridge, shredded a few pieces of chicken into the bowl and placed it on the floor. The little dog didn't hesitate. He bolted to the bowl and devoured it with the ferocity of someone who hadn't eaten in days. "Whoa, slow down," Emily said with a laugh. "No one's taking it from you." While he ate, she filled a second bowl with water and sat cross-legged on the floor, watching him. His coat was a mess, tangled and caked with dirt, but she could see glimpses of caramel-colored fur underneath. He wasn't a big dog, maybe a terrier mix. Small but scrappy. As he lapped up the last drop of water, she tilted her head, studying him. "You need a name, little guy," she mused aloud. "How about Max?" "No, you're not a Max." She tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Charlie?" "No, that's too ordinary." The dog tilted his head, watching her with curious eyes. "Buddy," she said suddenly, snapping her fingers. "Yeah, that's it. Buddy." His ears perked up like he recognized it. Emily smiled wide, feeling a small flicker of pride. "You like that, huh?" "Buddy, it is." She reached out to scratch behind his ears, and this time, he leaned into her touch with a soft grunt of satisfaction. "Welcome home, buddy," she said softly, her fingers still buried in his fur. The town's reaction. Word spread quickly through Willowbrook as it always did. By the next morning, half the town knew Emily had taken in a stray dog. "Emily, I heard you found a dog." One of the local kids, Lucy, shouted from the street as she rode her bike past the house. "Can I come see him?" Later, another knock came at the door. It was Sarah, carrying a bag of dog treats and a bright blue collar. "Figured you'd need this," she said, tossing it to Emily. "Can't have him running around without a name tag." Emily chuckled, looping the collar around Buddy's neck. "Thanks, Sarah. I wasn't sure how I'd afford one yet." Don't mention it," Sarah said, leaning down to scratch Buddy's head. "This little guy's already a town celebrity. I heard old Mrs. Davis call him, that miracle dog." "Miracle dog?" Emily laughed. "He's just a dog." "Not around here, he's not," Sarah replied. "This town's got a soft spot for rescue stories. Guess you're part of one now." Emily's smile softened. Maybe Sarah was right. The Evelyn problem. Not everyone was thrilled about Buddy. Dogs bark, Evelyn muttered one afternoon as she walked past Emily's porch. Her tone was sharp as ever, and her gaze was colder than frostbite. Barking dogs bring complaints. Emily stood at the top of the steps, her hands in her pockets. He's quiet, she shot back. Unlike some people. Evelyn stopped and turned slowly, narrowing her eyes. Don't get too comfortable, city girl, she said, her voice low and smooth. Dogs have a way of running off when they aren't wanted. Emily clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. Yeah, well, so do people, she muttered under her breath. Evelyn left, but her words lingered like smoke in the air. Emily didn't like it. Not one bit. Emily's bond with Buddy. Days passed and Emily's bond with Buddy grew stronger. He followed her everywhere, to the garden, to the hardware store, even to the porch when she sat outside at night. She loved the way his paws clicked on the wood floors, the way he circled 3 times before curling up to sleep, the way his tail thumped on the ground whenever she walked into the room. At night, when she lay on the mattress with the sound of the house creaking around her, she no longer felt alone. Buddy would press his back against hers, his little body warm and steady, like an anchor in the storm. Sometimes she'd look at him and wonder if maybe she had rescued him, but he was rescuing her too. The forest was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from stillness, but the quiet that feels like it's watching you. Emily's boots crunched softly against the bed of fallen leaves and twigs as she moved deeper into the woods. Above her, the thick canopy of oak and pine filtered the sunlight into scattered beams of gold, cutting through the shadows like knives of light. The air smelled of damp moss, bark, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. Buddy darted ahead, nose to the ground, sniffing every inch of earth like it held 1,000 secrets. His tail wagged furiously as he discovered something new every few seconds. Find anything good, Buddy? Emily asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. She'd been crouched for nearly 10 minutes, inspecting the underside of a large oak tree for mushrooms. Her fingers brushed over the soft sponge of a cluster of chanterelles. Jackpot, she whispered to herself, plucking them one by one and placing them in her wicker basket. Mushroom foraging wasn't something she thought she'd ever do. Back in the city, food came in plastic-wrapped packages, not from the ground. But Willowbrook had a way of changing you. Sarah had taught her how to spot the good mushrooms, and Emily had found she liked it. The slow, steady pace of it, the way the world seemed to pause while she worked. All right, Buddy, she called, standing up and dusting off her jeans. Let's head back before it gets too late. Buddy barked once in reply, but he didn't follow her. Instead, he stood a few yards away, ears perked, his entire body stiff like a statue. He was staring at something beyond the trees. Emily frowned, her eyes narrowing. What is it, boy? Buddy let out a low whine, his head tilting slightly as if he didn't understand what he was seeing. Her heart gave a small jolt of unease. Wild animals weren't uncommon in the woods, but something about the way Buddy was behaving set her nerves on edge. Slowly, she approached, weaving through the thick underbrush, her hand gripping a sturdy tree branch for balance. That's when she saw it. A flash of dull silver caught her eye just ahead. She squinted, trying to make sense of it. Metal? Here. It didn't belong. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped closer, brushing aside the ferns and ivy that clung to her legs. Her breath hitched. There, tangled in roots and vines, was the twisted wreckage of an old airplane. Its rusted frame jutted out of the forest floor like the bones of some ancient beast. The tail section was broken clean off, half buried in the dirt, while the cockpit lay sideways, its cracked windshield reflecting shards of sunlight. One of the wings, bent at an unnatural angle, was covered in moss, blending it into the surrounding forest. Vines snaked through every crevice, their green tendrils claiming it as part of the woods. Emily's pulse quickened. Her first thought was that it was part of a local tourist exhibit, some kind of old war relic. But as she stepped closer, she realized this wreck was no exhibit. This plane had fallen from the sky. Her fingers brushed against the cool, corroded metal of the fuselage. It felt rough and cold like stone. The smell of rust was sharp in her nose, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest. The whole scene felt frozen in time, as if it had been trapped here for decades. Then she heard it. A small, muffled sound. A sneeze. Emily's heart stopped. Her eyes darted around the wreckage, her ears straining. Silence. Total, unyielding silence. She was so still she could hear the faint buzz of a distant dragonfly. Another sneeze. This time closer. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't an animal. It was too human. Too familiar. Hello, she called out, her voice echoing between the trees. Is someone there? No answer. She crouched low, pressing her ear to the side of the wreckage, her heart thudding wildly. Her hands felt clammy and every survival instinct in her body told her to run, to get out, to tell someone. But she didn't move. "Hey, if you can hear me, I'm here to help," she said, her voice steady but firm. Her hands ran along the rusted edges of the fuselage, searching for an opening. She found a crack wide enough to see inside. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness and she saw her. A little girl. She was huddled in the corner of the wreckage, clutching her knees to her chest. Her hair was tangled and wild, her face streaked with dirt. Her wide blue eyes locked onto Emily's, terrified but aware. She was alive. "Oh my God," Emily gasped. Hey, it's okay. I'm right here." She reached in, her fingers just barely able to touch the girl's hand. "You're all right, I promise. I'm going to get you out of here." The girl sniffled, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. She couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. Emily's heart squeezed. "Okay, just stay calm," Emily said, pulling back to assess the situation. The entrance was too narrow for her to squeeze in. Her eyes darted to the wing. It was bent, but she might be able to move it. She braced herself against the heavy metal with both hands and shoved with all her strength. The sharp bark of her boots digging into the ground echoed as she pushed. "Come on," she grunted, her muscles burning. "Move, you stupid." With a deafening groan of metal, the wing shifted. Roots snapped like brittle bones, and the wreckage shifted just enough to create an opening. Emily crawled in, ignoring the sharp bite of rusted metal against her jeans. Her fingers trembled as she reached the girl, cupping her face gently. "Hey, I've got you. My name's Emily. Can you tell me yours?" The girl stared at her for a moment, her lips quivering. "Lila," she whispered, barely audible. "Lila," Emily repeated, nodding. "That's a beautiful name. I'm going to get you out, okay? You're safe with me." Lila nodded weakly. Emily moved quickly, wrapping her arms around the girl and pulling her out inch by inch. It wasn't easy. Her heart pounded with each pull, every scrape of metal against fabric making her wince. "Almost there," she panted. "Just a little more." With one final heave, she yanked Lila free from the wreckage, stumbling backward and falling flat on her back. Lila landed on her chest, and for a moment, all Emily could do was lie there, staring up at the sky. The canopy of trees swirled with light and shadow. Her arms ached. Her legs felt like jelly. "Got you," she whispered breathlessly. "Told you I would." Buddy barked, rushing over and circling them like he'd just won a prize. Emily sat up, cradling Lila in her lap. The girl was light as a feather, her arms wrapped around Emily's neck with a grip so tight it hurt. Emily didn't care. She held on just as tight. "It's over," Emily whispered into Lila's hair. "You're safe now." The world around them seemed to settle. The forest, so eerie and watching before, now felt alive with warmth and life. Birds chirped from the treetops, the distant rustle of leaves sounding like soft applause. Emily carried Lila all the way back to town. She didn't stop. She didn't waver. The child in her arms was proof that sometimes the forest didn't just whisper, it called out for help. She had answered. But as she neared the edge of the forest, she noticed something. A figure stood in the distance, near the end of the road, just beyond the clearing. Emily squinted. It was a woman, arms crossed, watching. Evelyn. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't stop. She kept walking, eyes locked ahead. Her heart was still racing, but not from fear. From resolve. Evelyn didn't move. She just watched. As Emily passed her, she felt Evelyn's eyes follow her all the way into town. The sun was sinking low in the sky, turning the clouds a deep orange pink as Emily walked down Willowbrook's main road with Lila in her arms. Her legs ached, her back throbbed, and her heart was still racing from the sheer adrenaline of it all. Buddy trotted at her side, glancing up at Lila every few seconds as if checking to make sure she was still okay. By the time she reached the first row of houses, people began to notice. Mrs. Franklin, the elderly woman who always sat on her porch knitting, leaned forward, squinting. Her eyes widened and she gasped so loud it startled her cat off her lap. "It's her!" Mrs. Franklin shouted, her voice shrill with shock. "It's the girl. She's got the missing girl." Emily's heart lurched as curtains snapped open, doors creaked, and people spilled out of their homes, all eyes locking on her and the child cradled in her arms. It felt like being caught in the glow of 100 flashlights. "That's Lila," someone shouted. "Where did she find her? Oh my God, she's alive." Feet pounded on the pavement as people rushed toward them. Sarah was the first to reach them, her face a mix of shock and relief. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stumbled forward. "Emily, is that Lila?" Emily breathed, nodding. She was trapped in an old plane wreck in the forest. "She's shaken, but she's okay." "Holy," Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she leaned in close to Lila. "Sweetheart, you're safe now, okay? You're safe." Lila buried her face in Emily's neck, clutching her tightly. Emily rubbed slow circles on her back, whispering, "You're okay. You're okay." The crowd grew, voices rising with questions, gasps, and murmurs of disbelief. Jack arrived, pushing his way through, his face set in a hard, serious expression. His gaze flicked from Emily to Lila, his eyes narrowing in confusion, then softening in realization. "Where did you find her?" he asked, his tone sharp but not unkind. "Old plane wreck," Emily replied, her breathing still uneven. "Out near the East Trail. She was trapped inside." Jack's jaw clenched and he let out a long breath through his nose. His eyes met Emily's and something passed between them, unspoken but solid. "Respect." "You did good, Emily," Jack said, his voice quieter this time. "Real good." The crowd was now a full circle around them, whispers blending into a rising hum of astonishment and awe. Then came another sound. Fast footsteps. Urgent. Heavy. "Lila." A voice cracked through the crowd like a whip, sharp and desperate. People parted as a woman sprinted through them, eyes wild with panic. Her chest rose and felt like she'd been running for miles. Her gaze zeroed in on the child in Emily's arms, and her face crumpled with raw emotion. It was Evelyn. Her eyes locked on Lila and she stumbled forward, her hands shaking. Her normally rigid face was twisted with so much relief it was almost unrecognizable. "Lila. Oh my God, Lila." Emily crouched down, her arms loosening just enough for Lila to see. As soon as Lila spotted Evelyn, she burst into tears, reaching out with small, trembling hands. "Aunt Evie," she sobbed. Evelyn fell to her knees, tears streaking down her face as she pulled Lila into her arms, holding her so tightly it was as if she was afraid she'd disappear again. Evelyn's body shook with silent sobs, and she buried her face in Lila's hair. You're okay," Evelyn chanted like a prayer, rocking Lila back and forth. "I'm here. I'm right here. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Emily stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. Her hands hovered awkwardly at her sides, unsure if she should stay or leave. But then Evelyn looked up at her. Her eyes, swollen and red with tears, locked onto Emily's. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn did something Emily never expected. She reached out, grabbed Emily's hands and squeezed them so hard it almost hurt. "Thank you," Evelyn choked out, her voice breaking with every word. "Thank you. You brought her back. You brought her back to me." Emily's lips parted, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. I couldn't leave her there," she murmured, her voice thick. "You saved her," Evelyn said, her voice full of conviction. Her eyes were raw with sincerity, and for the first time, Emily saw something in Evelyn she'd never seen before: kindness. "You saved my girl." Tears stung Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away. She glanced down at Lila, now cradled in Evelyn's arms, her sobs quieting into soft hiccups. She felt a warmth she hadn't expected, a warmth that started in her chest and spread outward like a slow, steady fire. Later that evening, the whole town gathered at the town square, as if it were some kind of celebration. People passed cups of cider and whispered stories about Emily's rescue mission. The weight of their gazes was different now. Before, they looked at her like an outsider. Now they looked at her like she was one of them. "Emily," Mrs. Franklin called as she waved her cane from the sidelines. "Come here, sweetheart." Emily approached, still feeling a little out of place. "Yes, ma'am?" Mrs. Franklin reached out and cupped Emily's face in her wrinkled hands. "You're a good girl," she said, nodding firmly. "Your aunt would be proud." Emily's chest tightened. She gave a small, quiet nod. "Thank you." Jack approached next, holding 2 paper cups of cider. He handed one to Emily. "I know you're not big on praise," he said, sipping from his cup. "But you earned it." "I didn't do it for the praise," Emily replied, taking a sip of her cider. I had to do it." Jack smiled at her from the side of his mouth, his gaze soft with something that wasn't there before. "That's why it matters." Sarah approached, grinning ear to ear, tossing her arm around Emily's shoulders like they'd been best friends for years. Well, if this ain't the town's new hero," she teased, giving Emily a light shake. "You might actually start liking it here." Emily glanced around at the faces watching her. They weren't just watching her. They saw her. She let out a short, breathy laugh. "Yeah," she said, her gaze landing on Lila, who was now fast asleep in Evelyn's arms. "I think I might." That night, Emily sat on her front porch, her eyes gazing out over the quiet street. The town had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't the stillness of strangers. It was the quiet of people who had seen her, who had accepted her. Buddy lay at her feet, his soft snores filling the silence. The note from me still sat on the table beside her, the words now faded in her mind. She picked it up and stared at it for a moment before crumpling it in her hand. The front door of Evelyn's house creaked open. Emily's eyes lifted just in time to see Evelyn stepping outside, holding a blanket-wrapped Lila in her arms. Evelyn glanced over and spotted Emily watching her. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then Evelyn did something Emily never expected. She nodded. A small, barely there nod, but it was there. Not a truce. Not a friendship. But something close. Emily nodded back. She sat on the porch a little longer, the crumpled note still in her hand, and smiled to herself. She'd thought coming to Willowbrook was about fixing a house. But it wasn't. It was about building something new. The air in Willowbrook had shifted. It wasn't something you could see, but Emily could feel it. It was in the way the locals waved at her now, the way conversations didn't stop when she walked into the general store. Even Evelyn, who once eyed her like an unwanted pest, now offered her small nods when they crossed paths. It wasn't friendship, but it wasn't hostility either. But something still lingered. Emily sensed it every time Evelyn glanced at her for just a second too long, every time Sarah and Evelyn crossed paths without saying a word. She saw it in how Evelyn's eyes softened whenever Lila was around, like the little girl was the only thing holding her together. Something in the air between Evelyn and Sarah was unsettled, unspoken, and Emily was tired of not knowing what it was. Her chance to find out came sooner than she expected. The steady drum of rain hit the roof, and Emily stood in her kitchen, wiping down the counter as Buddy lay sprawled near the back door. She glanced outside, watching the rain fall in silver streaks. Her house was starting to feel like a home now. The freshly painted walls smelled clean, and the warmth of the stove filled the space with comfort. A knock echoed from the front door. Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel and made her way to the door. When she opened it, Evelyn stood there, rain dripping off the edge of her umbrella. Her gray coat clung to her frame, and for a moment she looked older, more tired than usual. "Can I come in?" Evelyn asked, her voice low and hesitant. Emily blinked in surprise but stepped aside. "Yeah, of course." Evelyn closed her umbrella and shook off the rain before stepping into the warm kitchen. She glanced around, eyes landing on Buddy, who lifted his head, sniffed the air, then plopped back down with a huff. "Cozy," Evelyn muttered, rubbing her arms as if she could brush away more than just the cold. She didn't sit, just hovered by the counter. I wanted to talk." Emily leaned against the kitchen table, folding her arms. "About what?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears. "About Sarah." Emily tilted her head, curious. "Okay, I'm listening." Evelyn hesitated, her fingers twitching at her sides. For a moment, Emily thought she might bolt, but then Evelyn sighed deeply, like she was about to unburden a weight she'd carried for too long. "Sarah and I haven't spoken properly in over 15 years, Evelyn admitted, her voice tight. "Not since our father passed." Emily frowned. "Why?" Evelyn's eyes darkened. "When my father died, he left most of the family's property to Sarah. Not me. Just her." Her jaw tensed, and her hands gripped the edge of the counter like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. "Said it was because she was better with people. Said I had too much pride." Evelyn gave a bitter laugh. "Can you believe that? Pride." Emily didn't respond, letting Evelyn continue. "It didn't matter that I took care of him those last 2 years, Evelyn said, her voice sharp now. "I was there. I fed him. I kept the house running. Sarah? She came by when it was convenient for her. But somehow she got it all. The house, the money, everything. Said she needed it more than I did." She scoffed, wiping at her eyes quickly like she could brush away her frustration. "So I told her she could have it. I told her I didn't need it. But I lied." Emily took a slow breath, watching the way Evelyn's fingers trembled. "Sometimes," Evelyn said quietly, "when people say they're fine, they're not." She glanced up at Emily, her eyes suddenly clearer than Emily had ever seen them. "But you probably already know that." Emily nodded. "Yeah, I do." A silence settled between them, broken only by the soft patter of rain. "You should talk to her," Emily said, her voice gentle but firm. Not for you. Not for her. For Lila. Evelyn's eyes flickered. Lila doesn't need to see all that mess. Lila sees it anyway, Emily replied. Kids always see more than you think. Evelyn didn't argue. She just stood there, her gaze distant as if she was watching a scene only she could see. I'll think about it, she said at last. Then, without another word, she left, leaving only a puddle of rainwater on Emily's floor. Later that evening, after Buddy had curled up on his favorite blanket and the rain had softened to a mist, Emily decided to climb up into the attic. She'd been putting it off for weeks, mostly because she hated the idea of what she might find up there, spiders, rot, or something worse. But tonight something felt different. The attic smelled like old paper and cedar wood. Dust floated in the air, lit by the beam of her flashlight. Boxes were stacked in haphazard piles, and old furniture was shoved into the corners like forgotten memories. She spotted a trunk in the far corner, tucked beneath a faded quilt. Her curiosity got the better of her and she pulled it into the center of the room. The brass lock was rusted, but it snapped open with a firm tug. Inside were old letters, brittle with age, and a photo album with a red leather cover. Emily flipped it open, her heart beating faster as she recognized the faces. Her Aunt Margaret stared back at her from the photo, much younger than Emily had ever seen her. Margaret was smiling, arms thrown around two other women. One of them was Sarah. The other was Evelyn. Emily's breath caught in her chest. They looked so different. Younger. Happier. Sarah had her head tossed back in laughter, and Evelyn's grin was so wide it didn't look like the same woman. They were standing on the front porch of the house. Her house, holding paintbrushes, their clothes splattered with paint. As she flipped through the album, she found more pictures. Margaret, Evelyn, and Sarah together. Building the fence. Planting flowers. Smiling like family should. What happened to you three? Emily murmured to herself. One photo stood out. It was Margaret, Evelyn, and Sarah standing in front of the house, their arms linked like sisters. But written at the bottom, scrawled in blue ink, were the words, 3 sisters. Unbreakable. Emily's heart ached. Sisters. Not friends. Sisters. Her fingers traced the words slowly, feeling the weight of them. Somewhere along the line, the bond had shattered. A week later, Emily invited both Sarah and Evelyn over, telling them it was for dinner. Sarah arrived first, carrying a pie and a bag of bread rolls. Evelyn arrived 15 minutes later, her eyes scanning the room warily. Lila sat at the kitchen table, coloring in her notebook, her little legs swinging beneath the chair. When Evelyn saw Sarah, she froze. Sarah stiffened too, setting down the pie like it might break. Hey, Sarah said awkwardly. Hey, Evelyn muttered, avoiding her gaze. They both stood there, silent as stones. Lila noticed and tilted her head. Why are you two so quiet? She asked, her little voice piercing through the tension. Emily smiled softly. Because sometimes grown-ups forget how to say sorry. The words hung in the air. Evelyn glanced at Sarah. Sarah glanced at Evelyn. And in that moment something shifted. I was wrong, Evelyn said suddenly, her voice rough but steady. I was mad and I was wrong. Sarah blinked, surprised, then nodded slowly. Yeah, me too. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But they sat at the table together for the first time in 15 years. Lila looked up from her coloring book, grinning from ear to ear. I like it when everyone's friends, she said matter-of-factly. Yeah, kid, Sarah said, ruffling her hair. Me too. Emily glanced at the photo album later that night. She didn't need to open it again. She knew the picture was there. 3 sisters. Unbreakable. Sometimes broken things could be put back together. The sound of steady knocking echoed from the front door, sharp and deliberate. Emily wiped her hands on a rag, stepping away from the kitchen sink where she'd been scrubbing the last stubborn stain off an old ceramic bowl. She glanced toward the window and saw Jack Henderson standing on the porch, one hand shoved in his pocket, the other tapping lightly on the door frame. Buddy barked twice from his spot by the window but didn't get up. By now, he knew Jack was one of the good ones. Emily opened the door, a crooked grin already on her face. Didn't realize I hired a supervisor, she teased, leaning against the frame. Jack raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a grin of his own. You didn't, but someone's gotta make sure you aren't cutting corners. He glanced over her shoulder, squinting toward the kitchen. Still haven't fixed that cabinet hinge, huh? Emily rolled her eyes but stepped aside to let him in. Maybe I was saving it for you, Mr. Fix-It? Jack huffed a laugh as he walked in, his boots thudding softly on the hardwood floor. The house smelled of fresh coffee and the faint sweetness of apples from a pie Sarah had dropped off earlier. Jack took a deep breath like he was letting it sink in. "Smells better in here," he remarked, glancing around. "Cozy." Emily smirked, crossing her arms. "Don't get used to it. I'm still figuring out how to keep it that way." Their eyes met for a moment too long, and Emily felt a strange warmth creep up her neck. She quickly turned away, pretending to tidy a nearby shelf. "Need me to look at that hinge for you?" Jack offered, his voice a little quieter now. "Yeah," Emily said, still not looking at him. "If you've got the time." "I've got time," Jack replied softly. The days passed with a gentle rhythm that Emily hadn't realized she needed. Her house, once cold and broken, now hummed with warmth and life. The kitchen shelves were stocked with jars of flour, sugar, and herbs Sarah had gifted her. The living room no longer smelled of mildew but of fresh pine, thanks to the new floor polish Jack had suggested. Her mornings started with walks through the forest with Buddy. She'd learned the sounds of the woods, the distant cry of a hawk, the gentle rustle of squirrels darting from tree to tree, the steady crunch of her boots on the dirt path. Buddy loved it, sprinting ahead and circling back as if to say, "Hurry up, slowpoke." But it wasn't just her house or the forest that had changed. The town had too. At first, Emily had been that girl with the old house. Then she was the one who found Lila. Now she was just Emily. She'd become part of the daily hum of Willowbrook. People waved when she walked by. The kids from down the street ran up to pet Buddy. Mr. Horner at the hardware store offered her discounts on tools just 'cause. It was nice. Nicer than she expected. One morning, Evelyn and Sarah showed up on her porch together, arms full of supplies. Evelyn carried a basket of candles, while Sarah had a bag of colorful streamers slung over her shoulder. The sight of them standing together was still strange to Emily, like seeing two birds who used to fight over a perch now sitting side by side. "We're decorating for the town anniversary," Sarah announced, nudging past Emily like she'd been invited. "You're helping." "Wait, what?" Emily asked, eyes darting between the two sisters. "Nobody asked me." "We just did," Evelyn said matter-of-factly, walking straight to the dining room table and setting down the candles. She raised an eyebrow as if daring Emily to argue. Emily blinked, glancing at Sarah for confirmation. Sarah shrugged with a grin. "Don't look at me, kid. Evelyn's calling the shots this time." Emily opened her mouth to argue, but something about the sight of Evelyn, her eyes focused, her shoulders no longer stiff with pride, stopped her. Maybe it wasn't so bad being asked to help. "Fine," Emily said, closing the door behind them. "But I'm not hanging streamers on the ceiling." "Deal," Sarah said, smirking as she dumped the bag of streamers onto the table. "You're on cupcake duty." "Cupcake duty?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Hope you can bake," Sarah teased, nudging her playfully. "Don't worry, I've got the sprinkles covered." 2 days before the anniversary celebration, Evelyn did something Emily never saw coming. She invited her to dinner. It was an awkward moment. Evelyn had stopped by to return a casserole dish Emily had loaned her. They exchanged a few words, nothing remarkable, until Evelyn cleared her throat and blurted, "Dinner's at 6. Be there." Emily blinked, stunned. "You will want me to come to dinner?" "Don't make me repeat myself," Evelyn snapped, her face already turning pink. She shoved the casserole dish into Emily's hands and turned on her heel, walking away so fast you'd think she was being chased. Emily stood there, stunned. She glanced at Buddy, who tilted his head at her, equally confused. "Did that just happen?" she asked him. Buddy wagged his tail. The dinner at Evelyn's house was quieter than Emily had expected. Sarah was there, of course, and Lila sat next to her, happily babbling about her art project from school. Evelyn served roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Simple but hearty. Emily sat at the end of the table, feeling a little like an intruder, but no one treated her like one. She listened to Sarah and Evelyn bicker, not with venom but with something closer to affection. She watched Evelyn scold Lila for chewing too loudly, only for Lila to giggle and make the same noise on purpose. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn turned to Emily and asked, "How's the kitchen cabinet coming along?" Emily blinked. "It's fine. Jack's been helping me with it." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into something suspiciously close to a smile. "Jack, huh?" "Oh, don't start," Emily groaned, her face flushing. Sarah barked out a laugh, nudging her sister. "See? I told you." "Told her what?" Emily asked, suddenly wary. "Nothing," Evelyn said, her voice light with mischief. "Absolutely nothing." Lila leaned over, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Are you gonna marry Mr. Jack?" she asked. The whole table erupted in laughter, except for Emily, who buried her face in her hands, groaning, "I'm never coming to dinner again." When Emily got home, she sat on the edge of her bed, letting the day sink in. She thought about the dinner table, the laughter, the food, the way Evelyn's eyes had softened just a little when she handed Emily a plate of mashed potatoes. Her chest felt warm, like she was being wrapped in a soft blanket she hadn't realized she needed. For so long, she told herself she was fine on her own. She didn't need people. She didn't need family. But tonight something had shifted. Buddy climbed onto the bed, curling up beside her, his warmth radiating through her side. Emily scratched behind his ears, her heart feeling full in a way it hadn't in a long, long time. She glanced out the window at the house across the street, Evelyn's house. A soft glow from the kitchen window told her the family was still awake. Evelyn had been wrong. Sometimes you can have pride and still ask for help. Emily smiled. Not an orphan. Not a stranger. Not alone. "Come on, buddy," she said, laying back on the bed, her fingers running through his fur. "Looks like we're staying." Buddy sighed in contentment, his eyes closing slowly. So did Emily. The autumn air had a crisp bite, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The forest trail stretched ahead, dappled with soft gold light as the sun filtered through thinning branches. Emily walked slowly, her pace unhurried. Beside her, Buddy darted from bush to bush, his tail wagging as he chased after invisible creatures. Jack walked a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his gaze scanning the treetops like he was searching for something he'd never find. "I swear," Jack muttered, side-eyeing Emily with a smirk, "this dog's got more energy than I had at 10 years old." Emily laughed, pulling her coat tighter around her as a cool breeze swept by. "He's a hunter at heart," she said, watching Buddy pounce on a pile of leaves like it owed him money. "But I like him better as a scavenger. Less risk of him dragging home a possum." Jack chuckled, his breath visible in the cold air. They walked in easy silence after that, their footsteps crunching softly on the path. No rush. No urgency. Just them, the woods, and the quiet companionship that had become as familiar as the forest itself. Their walks had started as a simple way to get outside, a shared routine born from Jack's visits to check on the house. Or at least that's what he claimed. But lately it felt like more than that. Their conversations ran longer, their silences grew more comfortable, and Emily found herself looking forward to the moments when Jack would glance over at her with that half-smile of his. "House looks good these days," Jack said, nudging a small rock with his boot. "That front porch might be the best part." Emily glanced at him, catching the pride in his voice. "Yeah, well, it should be. You practically rebuilt it." He shrugged, looking down at his boots. "Didn't do it alone." Her heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. She glanced away, her eyes following Buddy's path through the trees. Back at the house, Jack stood at the kitchen counter, tightening a hinge on one of the cabinets while Emily stirred a pot of soup on the stove. The scent of onions and garlic filled the room, warm and familiar. She glanced over her shoulder, watching him work with quiet focus, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Don't tighten it too much," she warned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Last time you overdid it, I couldn't open the cabinet without a crowbar." Jack snorted, shaking his head. "That was one time, and I told you it was the wood swelling, not me." Emily said, fighting back a grin. For a moment, the only sounds were the bubbling soup, the soft clinking of Jack's tools, and the rhythmic creak of Buddy's paws as he wandered across the wooden floor. It felt normal. Like they'd been doing this for years instead of a few months. "You ever think about leaving this town?" Jack asked suddenly, his eyes still on the hinge. His tone was casual, but Emily caught something under it. "Not anymore," she replied, stirring the soup a little slower. "When I first got here, I thought I'd stay just long enough to fix the house, maybe sell it. But now," she glanced at him, watching his hands work. Strong hands, steady hands. "Now it feels like I'd be walking away from something worth staying for." Jack stopped what he was doing, turning to face her fully. His eyes met hers, brown, warm, steady. His gaze held hers longer than usual, and for a moment, it felt like the air between them had shifted. "Yeah," he said softly, leaning against the counter, his arms crossed. "I get that." Her heart thudded harder than it should have. She broke eye contact first, her pulse a little too fast as she stirred the soup with more force than necessary. "Get it together, Emily," she told herself. "It's just Jack. Jack the handyman. Jack the guy who stayed." Words spread fast in Willowbrook, especially when it involved romance. Sarah and Evelyn were no help. "You two are practically married already," Sarah teased one morning while dropping off a box of fresh apples. "I saw him sanding that front porch like it was his personal masterpiece. A man doesn't do that unless he's got his heart in it." "Don't be ridiculous," Emily said, stacking the apples on the counter. "He's just being nice." Sure, Sarah said, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "I'm just saying people around here are starting to notice." Emily shook her head, refusing to dignify that with a response. But when Evelyn stopped by later that afternoon with a bag of flour and a glance at the still wet paint on the porch, she raised an eyebrow. "He's good with his hands," Evelyn remarked as if she were talking about the weather. "Yup," Emily said, keeping her eyes on the bag of flour she was unloading. "Hard to find it these days," Evelyn added, her voice flat but loaded with implication. Emily glanced up, narrowing her eyes. "Don't you start too." Evelyn shrugged, a hint of a grin tugging at her lips. "I'm just saying. You could do worse." The storm came out of nowhere. One moment the sky was clear, the next rain lashed against the house like 1,000 tiny hammers. Thunder rolled overhead, rattling the windows, and lightning flickered across the sky, making the whole world flash white for a heartbeat. Emily sat on the couch, Buddy pressed against her side, his ears twitching with every boom of thunder. She stroked his head, watching the rain streak down the glass. A knock came at the door. "Art. Urgent." Emily frowned. Who would be out in this weather? She grabbed a sweater, pulling it on as she made her way to the door. When she opened it, rain blew in sideways, drenching her instantly. Jack stood there, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. His chest heaved like he'd run all the way here. In his hand, he held a bouquet of wildflowers, the petals battered by the rain but still bright with color. "Jack," she said, stunned. "What are you doing?" His eyes met hers, wild and unguarded. "I've been thinking about it all day," he said, breathless. His voice was raw, like he'd been holding these words in for too long. "Thinking about you. About this house. About everything." Her heart stopped. "I'm done waiting," he said, stepping forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm done pretending like I don't feel it." He held out the flowers, half wilted but still beautiful. "I know this ain't some grand gesture, but it's all I could think of. So I'm saying it now before I lose my nerve." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I like you, Emily. More than I should." The storm raged behind him, rain pouring in sheets, lightning flashing behind his silhouette. Emily stared at him, frozen in place, her heart pounding in her ears. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. "Say something," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. "Please." Emily stepped forward, her breath hitching in her chest. Her hands reached for his face, cupping his jaw as she pulled him forward. Her lips crashed into his and suddenly nothing else mattered. The storm could rage. The thunder could roar. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the warmth of his hands on her back, the way he leaned into her like he'd been waiting for this moment as long as she had. When they finally pulled back, Jack's forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. His eyes stayed closed, like he didn't want the moment to end. "Guess you like me too, huh?" he murmured, grinning. Emily laughed, breathless but light as air. "Took you long enough to figure it out." He pulled her close again as the rain softened into a quiet drizzle. The storm was gone. The morning was bright and cool, the crisp scent of autumn hanging in the air. Emily knelt in the garden she had spent months bringing back to life. Her hands were covered in dirt, and a smudge of it streaked her cheek, but she didn't care. She leaned in, brushing her fingers over the soft petals of a blooming marigold. Her eyes traced every fold and curl, every shade of orange and yellow. "Perfect," she murmured to herself, smiling softly. Buddy sat nearby, his head resting on his paws as he watched her work. His tail thumped lazily against the ground every so often, a steady rhythm that matched the beat of the world around them. Birds chirped in the distance, and the breeze carried the faint rustle of leaves. She leaned back on her heels, wiping the sweat from her brow. Her heart felt light, like something inside her had finally settled. This garden had been a mess when she moved in, just like the house, just like her life. But now it was something beautiful, something whole. "Not bad," came Jack's familiar voice from behind her. Emily glanced over her shoulder and saw him walking up the path, hands stuffed in his pockets, that same lopsided grin on his face. He wore a plain gray flannel and jeans, his hair slightly tousled from the breeze. He looked like he belonged here. "Took you long enough to notice?" she teased, turning back to the marigolds. "Oh, I've been noticing," Jack said, his voice quieter now, closer. Emily felt the shift in his tone. She turned her head and saw him kneeling beside her, his brown eyes locked on hers. Her breath caught in her chest. "Jack," she said, her brow furrowed with curiosity. He didn't say a word. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, square box. For a second, Emily's mind went blank. Her eyes flicked from the box to his face, her heart racing. "Emily," Jack began, his voice steady but his eyes filled with something she'd never seen in him before: vulnerability. "I've been thinking about this for a while. You already know I'm not great with speeches, so I'm just gonna say it plain." He opened the box, and inside was a simple but beautiful gold ring, a small sapphire nestled in its center. No frills. No excessive shine. Just simple, sturdy, and strong like Jack. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. "You've built this place into something incredible," Jack said, his voice soft and steady. "You built me into something better too. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to do it alone again." He looked up at her, his eyes full of hope, of love, of every quiet moment they'd shared together. "Will you marry me, Emily?" For a moment she was too stunned to speak. Her eyes filled with tears as a slow, unstoppable smile broke across her face. Her heart swelled so big she thought it might burst. "Yeah," she whispered, nodding quickly. Her voice broke with emotion, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yeah, I will." Jack's grin spread wide as he pulled the ring from the box, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made just for her. Buddy barked once, as if to announce to the whole world that something important had just happened. Emily laughed through her tears, wrapping her arms around Jack's neck and pulling him into the dirt with her. He laughed too, his arms wrapping tightly around her as they tumbled onto the grass. They lay there, tangled up in each other, their laughter echoing through the garden. And for the first time in a long, long time, Emily felt like every piece of her life had finally found its place. The town of Willowbrook hadn't seen a celebration like this in years. News of the wedding spread fast, and before Emily knew it, nearly everyone in town had offered to help. Sarah took charge of decorations, stringing fairy lights and white ribbons through the trees in the large forest clearing. Evelyn surprised everyone by volunteering to arrange the flowers, and even more surprising, she let Lila help. Jack's crew of friends built a rustic wooden archway at the center of the clearing, lined with wildflowers Emily had grown herself. The morning of the wedding was cool but bright. The sun peeked through the treetops, spilling golden light over the clearing, dappling the ground with soft patches of warmth. The scent of fresh pine hung in the air, mingling with the sweetness of the flowers Evelyn had arranged along the tables. Inside Emily's house, Sarah fussed with the lace trim on Emily's dress, fingers moving with precision. "Stop squirming," Sarah muttered, tugging the fabric into place. "I'm not squirming," Emily protested, but her nerves betrayed her. Her hands fidgeted with the tiny sapphire ring on her finger. Sarah said, giving her a knowing look. "You look beautiful, by the way." Emily glanced at herself in the mirror. Her dress was simple, ivory lace with delicate floral details along the neckline and sleeves. Her hair was loose, waves cascading over her shoulders, and a small bundle of wildflowers was tucked behind her ear. She didn't feel like a princess. She felt like herself. "You think he'll cry?" Emily asked, half joking. "Jack." Sarah snorted. "That man cried when Buddy got his paw stuck in a fence. He's definitely gonna cry." Emily laughed, her nerves easing just a little. The entire town of Willowbrook gathered in the clearing, rows of chairs filled with familiar faces. The quiet hum of conversation fell silent as music began to play, soft guitar strumming from one of Jack's friends. Lila, dressed in a pale blue dress, tossed white petals down the aisle, her grin so big it could have lit up the whole forest. Buddy followed close behind her, a small burlap pouch tied around his collar. Inside it, the rings rested safely. Then it was Emily's turn. She stepped forward, her heart pounding harder with each step, her gaze locked on Jack. He stood at the end of the aisle, his suit a simple charcoal gray, but somehow on him, it looked like royalty. His eyes were on her and only her. She saw it. The way his eyes shined with unshed tears. Sarah was right. Her heart ached with joy. Her steps felt lighter than air, like she was floating toward him. She could see Evelyn standing by Jack's side, her lips pressed tight to keep from crying. Sarah was grinning wide, her hands clasped together like she was holding in a shout of excitement. When Emily reached Jack, he didn't say anything right away. His eyes searched hers as if trying to memorize every detail. She reached up, brushing a tear from his cheek with her thumb. "Told you you'd cry," she whispered. He let out a breathy laugh, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Yeah. The officiant cleared his throat, and the ceremony began. They exchanged vows, honest, simple words spoken with quiet conviction. Emily's voice only wavered once, and Jack squeezed her hands to steady her. Then came the moment for the rings. Buddy barked on cue, trotting up to Jack with the small pouch hanging from his collar. Jack crouched, his hands gentle as he untied it and pulled out the rings. The town laughed and someone whispered, "Good boy, Buddy." They placed the rings on each other's fingers, the cool metal a promise made tangible. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. "Jack, you may kiss the bride." Jack didn't wait. He leaned in, his hands cradling Emily's face, and kissed her like it was the only thing keeping him alive. She kissed him back with everything she had. Cheers erupted around them. Applause. Laughter. Sarah whooping louder than anyone. They pulled apart, both breathless, both beaming. Emily glanced around at the faces she once thought she'd never call family. But they were family now. Jack pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closed as he whispered, "You're my home, Emily." Her throat tightened with emotion, tears threatening to fall. "And you're mine." The crowd cheered again as Jack lifted Emily off the ground, spinning her in the air, both of them laughing as if they'd just discovered the secret to happiness. Buddy barked once, his tail wagging like it might never stop. The forest watched. The world watched. But in that moment it was just them. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one Emily had known when she first arrived in Willowbrook. Back then, it was the quiet of emptiness, the kind that echoed off bare walls and hollow floors. Now it was the quiet of contentment, the hush of a home that didn't need to prove itself anymore. Sunlight streamed through the lace-trimmed curtains, casting soft patches of warmth on the hardwood floor. The faint smell of fresh bread lingered from breakfast, and on the couch, Lila sat with a picture book in her lap, flipping pages as Buddy lay sprawled beside her, his eyes half closed. But the real sound, the one Emily couldn't stop listening for, was the gentle cooing of her newborn son Ethan. She sat in the rocking chair by the window, cradling him in her arms, her heart full to bursting. His tiny hands twitched in his sleep, his soft breaths warming the crook of her neck. Emily leaned her head back, rocking slowly, her gaze drifting to the window where she could see the garden outside. Her garden. Her home. Jack's laughter echoed from outside, where he was helping Sarah and Evelyn set up for the cookout. She could hear Sarah's sharp wit cutting through the air, followed by Jack's booming laugh. Evelyn's voice, steady but lighter than it used to be, chimed in now and then with dry humor of her own. Emily watched them for a moment, her heart swelling with quiet joy. Her family. It had taken her a long time to believe she could have one. But here they were, as real as the baby in her arms. "Mom?" Emily turned her head toward the sound of Lila's voice. She blinked, stunned for a second, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Lila looked up from her book, tilting her head innocently. "Mom, is it okay if I give Buddy the last piece of my toast?" Emily's breath caught in her chest. "Mom." It wasn't the first time Lila had spoken the word, but it was the first time she'd said it to her. Her eyes filled with tears so fast she had to blink them away before they spilled over. "Yeah, baby," Emily said, her voice soft but steady. "Go ahead." Lila smiled, hopping off the couch and running toward Buddy, who instantly perked up, his eyes alert. "You're in luck, Buddy boy," Lila said, crouching down to hand him the piece of toast. Buddy sniffed it first, then chomped it down in one bite, his tail wagging like crazy. Emily looked down at Ethan, who was still fast asleep against her chest. She rocked him gently, her heart aching with so much love she thought it might break her. Mom. She'd worn so many titles in her life. Orphan. Outsider. Stranger. None of them had ever felt like this. None of them had ever felt this real. The smell of burgers and grilled vegetables drifted through the air, mingling with the sound of laughter, conversation, and Buddy's occasional bark. Tables were lined with food, every dish contributed by a neighbor. Potato salad from Mrs. Franklin. Baked beans from Sarah. Lemon bars from Evelyn, though she'd grumbled about it the whole time she made them. The whole town of Willowbrook had shown up. Kids ran in circles, chasing each other with water guns. Mr. Horner from the hardware store tossed a football back and forth with Jack, who caught it one-handed to the cheers of the kids watching him. Emily stood by the food table, one arm cradling Ethan, the other stacking paper plates. She wore a loose summer dress that Jack had called the prettiest thing I've ever seen. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had that tired but glowing look of a new mother. "Look at you," Sarah said, sidling up beside her with a plate of brownies in hand. "You're a full-on domestic goddess now." Emily shot her a look. "I just had a baby. I wouldn't go that far." "Please," Sarah said, waving her off. You're a mom, you're married to a man who looks like he just stepped out of a romance novel, and your dog brings you wildflowers. You're living the dream, honey? Emily snorted, shaking her head. Don't let Jack hear you call him a romance novel hero. He'll never let it go. Too late, Jack called from across the yard, tossing the football back to Mr. Horner. He grinned at Emily, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I heard it. Of course you did, Emily muttered, laughing under her breath. Nearby, Evelyn sat at a picnic table with Lila, helping her braid wildflowers into a crown. Her movements were slow but gentle, her eyes focused with quiet concentration. She leaned in as Lila whispered something to her, and Evelyn actually smiled. Emily watched them for a moment, her chest aching with something soft and unbreakable. Evelyn had been the hardest one to win over, but now, watching her with Lila, it was clear she'd been won. All right, everyone, Jack called, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. Time for a toast. The crowd quieted down, kids stopping their games, conversations pausing as everyone turned to Jack. He stood in the center of the clearing, a mason jar of lemonade in his hand. He glanced at Emily, his smile small but certain. This town's seen its share of change, Jack began, his eyes scanning the crowd. Some of it good, some of it hard. But every now and then, change brings you something you didn't even know you needed. He looked at Emily, his eyes warm and full of love. This woman right here, she's changed more than this house. She changed me. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, quiet and thoughtful. Emily walked into this town thinking she was here to fix up an old house, Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. But she did a lot more than that. She built a home. She built a family. His gaze locked on hers, his voice thick with emotion. And she taught me that love doesn't have to be big and flashy to matter. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the steady work, the hands holding you up when you feel like falling. Evelyn wiped at her eyes, trying to hide it with a sniff. Sarah nudged her playfully, smirking. So here's to Emily, Jack said, lifting his jar high. The one who showed us all that sometimes, love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. To Emily, the crowd echoed, lifting their glasses. Emily laughed through her tears, her heart too full to hold in the emotion anymore. She glanced down at Ethan, who stirred in her arms, letting out a soft baby sigh. She kissed his head, her tears landing softly on his hair. Jack made his way through the crowd, stopping in front of her. His eyes never left hers. Hey, he whispered, brushing his thumb against her cheek. You okay? Yeah, she breathed, nodding quickly. I'm more than okay. He kissed her softly, just a press of warmth that lingered on her lips like a promise. When he pulled back, she smiled at him like he was the sun breaking through the clouds. The house had quieted again. Everyone had gone home, the leftovers packed into containers and sent with neighbors. The soft glow of the porch light lit up the front steps, where Emily stood, cradling Ethan as he slept. Jack sat on the step below, leaning against her legs. Buddy lay stretched out nearby, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. The night air was cool, the stars bright in the wide sky. The house behind them, once crumbling and empty, now stood as a symbol of everything they'd built. Emily gazed out at the street, her heart calm, her spirit quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. For the first time she felt it deep in her bones, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She bent her head down, kissed the top of Ethan's head and whispered, "Welcome home, baby." The stars above flickered in quiet agreement.